His wife died in a car crash. 1 week later, a lawyer handed him the keys to a luxury apartment. She transferred it into your name a month before she passed, he said. While she was alive, she had flat out forbidden him to ask questions about her trips. Robert Miller planned to sell the place immediately. But first, he decided to take a look. He opened the door and froze. There, sitting at the table in the living room, was a woman. "Hello, friends. It feels like only yesterday. Take care of yourselves and the people you love. Tell me in the comments. Do you listen to our stories alone or with someone else? Maybe over dinner or right before bed?" 2 weeks had passed since the funeral, and Robert Miller still had not moved Regina's shoes away from the front door. Every morning he went downstairs to the kitchen, where the windows were filmed with a thin skin of frost at dawn. He put the kettle on, took her half-used box of green tea down from the shelf, then put it back and brewed his usual black coffee instead. A knitted shawl still hung over the back of the armchair in the living room, holding the faintest trace of her perfume. Robert walked around that chair in a wide arc, the way people step around the spot where something irreparable happened. The neighbor from the corner house stopped by on the second day. Valerie Jenkins brought a pot of chicken soup and stood in the doorway, not knowing what to say. "Robert, you can't go on like this. Eat something proper. I brought you something hot." "Thank you, Valerie. I'm full." "Really? What would I do with so much food?" "Full, my foot. There's practically a tumbleweed in your refrigerator. Half a carton of milk, 3 eggs, and nothing else. I checked while you were in the bathroom. Don't even argue with me." He took the pot, thanked her again, closed the door, and placed the soup beside yesterday's untouched biscuits from another neighbor. For 34 years, Robert had designed heating and ventilation systems. Every project had a beginning, stages, and a completion date. Every duct went exactly where the plan said it should go. Now all the calculations had been wiped clean, and for the first time in 60 years, Robert had no idea what the next step was supposed to be. The doorbell rang on Thursday, close to noon. On the porch stood Oliver Hayes, the lawyer who had handled Regina's estate matters. He was short, precise, and carried a thick leather folder under one arm. "Robert, good afternoon. I'm sorry to drop by without warning. I wanted to give you some time to collect yourself, but certain matters can't wait." "Come in, Oliver. Want some soup? I've got a strategic reserve from the neighbors. 3 pots. Pretty soon, they won't fit in the fridge anymore." Oliver declined the soup, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the folder. Regina changed her will 6 months before the accident. "There are some specific clauses." "What do you mean, specific?" "We settled all that back in 1998. The house, the land, the joint accounts. We never planned to change any of it." "Well, it isn't quite that simple." Oliver placed a set of keys in front of him. They had a metal keychain engraved with an address in downtown Denver. On the back, in Regina's handwriting, small, slightly slanted, and painfully familiar, were the words, "Forgive me. Now you'll understand." "This is a condo in a new luxury high-rise," the lawyer said, keeping his eyes on the documents. "It was purchased 6 years ago and titled solely in Regina's name. All expenses were paid separately. According to her wishes, the property now passes to you." Robert turned the keychain over in his hand. "Forgive me. Now you'll understand." "Oliver, listen to me," he said slowly. "This woman couldn't keep a Christmas present secret for 27 years. She usually confessed 3 days early. She spoiled the endings of mystery shows halfway through the episode because she didn't have the patience to wait. Where would a secret account come from? What apartment? I understand how this must feel." "No, you don't understand a thing. She was always saying, "Secrets kill a marriage." That was her favorite line. "Do you hear me?" Her favorite. Oliver was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "Regina insisted that you go there alone." Her exact words were, "There may be things there that he'll need silence and time to understand." "Silence and time," Robert repeated, and his own voice sounded strange to him. "All right, thank you if you need any legal help," or "Thank you, Oliver. No, I'll figure it out myself." When the lawyer left, Robert stayed seated with the keys in his hand. He remembered his last conversation with Regina 2 days before the crash. She had been sitting in that same spot, sorting bills, while he suggested they finally planned the trip to Italy they had dreamed about for nearly 10 years. Florence, Tuscany, the Amalfi Coast. She had looked up and something flickered in her eyes that he had not been able to read at the time. "Rob, there are things in my life you don't even know about. I've been meaning to tell you something for a long time. Honestly." He never had the chance to ask. Her phone rang. Regina stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind her. 15 minutes later, she was kissing his cheek in a hurry and promising to continue after her business trip. She never came back from that trip. The driver of a semi fell asleep at the wheel on the bypass. Later, while going through her phone, Robert found her last call. The number was saved under the letter K. He did not call it. At the time, that had seemed wise. Now, staring at the keychain, he understood it had been cowardice. He stood up, slipped the keys into the pocket of his winter coat, and stepped out into the December cold. The building was one of those glass and concrete towers that had risen in Denver's business district over the last couple of decades. The concierge behind the desk, a young man with a name tag, looked up and smiled as if he and Robert had known each other for 20 years. "Mr. Miller, hello. Ms. Parker said you'd be stopping by. 12th floor. The condo is immediately to the left of the elevator." Miss Parker, not Mrs. Miller. Here Regina existed under her maiden name, like a separate person, unattached to him and to the house with the shawl draped over the chair. Robert rode upstairs and unlocked the door. High ceilings, modern furniture, wide windows overlooking the South Platte River and the city lights beyond it. At home, Regina used to say designer furniture was a waste of money. Here, every corner contradicted every word she had ever said. He felt along the wall for a light switch and clicked it. Instead of lights, the electric shades began to glide downward with a soft mechanical hum. Jazz poured from hidden speakers. In the kitchen, an automatic humidifier hissed, grumbled, and began gathering force. Judging from the sound, it was roughly the size of a small reactor. Easy there. Robert rushed toward the machine. It was already throwing out clouds of steam with the enthusiasm of a cement mixer, blinking blue lights across its touch screen. Robert jabbed the first button he saw. The machine beeped in offense and began drying the air, even though there was no moisture left in it, making a deep, wounded groan. He poked another button. Hot water ran out of a side spout and onto the countertop. Oh, for the love of... Robert, who had spent his entire adult life designing honest pipes and understandable ventilation shafts, yanked the cord from the outlet. The machine went silent, though for another 5 seconds, something inside it burbled reproachfully like an insulted cat. From somewhere deeper in the apartment came a laugh. It was quiet, but completely alive. A young woman of about 30 stood in the doorway. She had shoulder-length dark hair and brown eyes, and in those eyes, Robert recognized Regina with a sudden, almost physical pain. But that was not what finished him. On her ears were green stones, antique peridot earrings from the Rocky Mountains that had belonged to Regina's late mother. 15 years ago, Regina had said she lost them. Robert had crawled across the floor for 2 days, checked the drains, and climbed under the porch with a flashlight. They had been here. "You're exactly like her," the woman said, nodding toward the humidifier. "Mom spent her first month trying to tame it too. Eventually, they reached some kind of agreement. "Excuse me," Robert forced out, "but who are you?" She paused. The smile left her face, leaving something fragile behind. "My name is Alexandra. I'm your daughter. Mom warned me that sooner or later you would show up here." Robert grabbed the back of the nearest chair. "Daughter." The word came out flat, like a sheet of paper fed through a printer. "You should sit down," Alexandra said, pointing to the couch. "Please, let me make tea. Normal tea in a kettle, without that infernal machine getting involved." She was speaking too fast, filling the pause in which a person might faint or scream. Robert sat because his legs refused to hold him up. A minute later, she came back with 2 mugs. She sat in the armchair by the window, across from him, not beside him. "I'm 30 years old, Robert. I was born 3 years before Mom met you. My biological father is Kyle Nicholson, a photographer. Mom got pregnant at 20, had me and left me to be raised by her great-aunt about 4 hours from Denver. Then she married you, and for all 27 years..." "Not one hint," Robert said. "Nothing at all." He lifted the mug, took a sip, burned himself, and set it back down. "We could never have a child," he said, and each word felt like a step on an icy staircase. "She went with me to every doctor. All those endless tests," she cried over every blank result. She kept saying, "Maybe it just wasn't meant to be for us." Alexandra lowered her eyes. "I know. She told me when I was older. She said that was the most unbearable part, going along with it and crying with you while knowing the truth." Silence settled between them. From the unplugged humidifier, one last drop fell and struck the countertop with a clear little sound, like the period at the end of a sentence no one wanted to say out loud. "Aunt Nina died 5 years ago," Alexandra continued, her voice steadier now. "I grew up with her until I finished high school. She was a wonderful woman, kind as anyone I've ever known. But she cooked so badly that even our cat approached his bowl with visible suspicion. After that, I went to community college because I thought I'd teach kids art. I figured out in time that it wasn't for me. Mom brought me to Denver and got me into a furniture restoration studio. Turns out I'm a lot more interested in digging through old dressers than in other people's children. Now I restore furniture and make handmade ceramics. 6 years ago, Mom bought this place for me." Alexandra stopped, stood up, and returned a minute later with a photograph in a simple wooden frame. Regina stood on the Riverwalk with a 7-year-old girl. Both of them were laughing. Wind pulled at their hair. In the picture, Regina looked younger and freer than Robert remembered her, being in her later years. "Every time she came back from a trip, she seemed renewed," Robert said, not taking his eyes off the photograph, "as if she had dropped some extra weight somewhere. Naive fool that I was, I thought she was just taking a break from me and my endless blueprints. Turns out she was taking a break from lying. She wasn't resting from you. She was resting from a burden she couldn't share with you. At my age, Alexandra, those are practically the same thing." He remembered the little gifts his wife had brought back from business trips. A scarf, a jar of local honey, an odd handmade mug. He had thought she was spoiling herself while traveling. The gifts had not been meant for him. "There's something else in this apartment," Alexandra said, taking the photograph and placing it on a shelf. "Mom put it together for you. Not for a family archive, I don't think. More like an explanation." She came back from the bedroom, carrying a thick binder with worn edges. It was heavy, packed with pages in plastic sleeves and divided by colored tabs. 3 sections, Alexandra, Kyle, Robert. Every page was dated. Some entries were typed. Others were written in that familiar right-leaning hand. Regina had kept this record for years. Alexandra placed the binder on the table between them. They're not exactly letters. More like her private chronicle, monologues into the void addressed to people who, at the time, couldn't read them. Robert opened to the first tab. The entry was from 3 years earlier, addressed to Alexandra. I'm protecting Robert. I'm protecting myself. I'm afraid of losing both my husband and you. When he says he regrets that we never had children, I want to take out my phone and show him your pictures. Every single time. And every single time, I put the phone back in my pocket. She keeps writing that she's a coward. Alexandra said, without judgment, simply stating a fact. Almost every few pages, she diagnoses herself with it. Robert turned to the second tab, an entry from 6 months earlier, addressed to Kyle. Alexandra is asking about her father. You don't even know she exists. I'm thinking about telling Robert everything before he retires. So this Kyle is your biological father, Robert said without looking up. If we're speaking strictly biologically, yes. I've seen him twice in my life, both times in old photographs. Robert took the third tab. Robert. An entry from 2 months before the accident. The handwriting was neater, more careful, as if Regina had recopied it clean. Rob, we have a daughter. She's 30 years old. Her name is Alexandra, and she is a wonderful person. I am asking your forgiveness for the lie, for every secret, for every day you believed me when I didn't deserve it. Every day beside you was a gift I did not deserve. He closed the binder. His hands would not obey him. There are pages farther in that will only make this worse, Alexandra said quietly, looking not at him but out the window. Maybe we should pause. Show me. At this point, what's left to protect? Alexandra found an entry from 3 months before the crash. Regina wrote that she could not be the wife Robert deserved. She loved him, but not the way he loved her. Kyle had reached out after 2 years of silence, divorced now, asking whether she had ever thought about what their life might have been. Regina had told him about Alexandra. Kyle wanted them to become a family. Regina planned to prepare Robert for the truth and leave him, loving him enough to let him go. The page slipped from Robert's fingers and floated to the floor. He did not pick it up. Did you know about this? He asked. No, of course not. Alexandra shook her head. I found it after the funeral while I was sorting through things. To be honest, it hit me pretty hard too, if that makes it easier. It doesn't. They sat in silence for about 5 minutes before Robert's phone gave a short buzz in his pocket. A text from an unknown number. Robert Miller. This is Kyle Nicholson. I know about the condo and Alexandra. Regina promised me certain things before she died, and I intend to get what I'm owed. I'll expect you tomorrow at 2 o'clock at the cafe on Colfax Avenue. Come alone. Let me see. Alexandra held out her hand. She read it and handed the phone back. Oh, so he's getting active with you now. He was messaging me 3 days ago. I ignored him. And what was the purpose of his visit to your inbox? A sudden attack of fatherly feeling. He decided he wanted to meet me and make up for lost time. Robert put the phone away and looked at the window, where the lights of evening Denver blurred through the frozen haze into a nearsighted mosaic. Well, you're not driving anywhere at this hour, Alexandra said, getting up. The couch is perfectly alive and it folds out. I'll find clean sheets. And don't start in with that male stubbornness of yours. All right. He did not argue because he knew he should not get behind the wheel. The night on the gray couch came in broken pieces. Every time Robert closed his eyes, he saw his wife's slanted handwriting, loving him enough to let him go. The phrase was elegant, almost beautiful, if you didn't think about what stood behind it. A decision made for two people by one. All these years she had turned him into a variable in an equation she was solving alone. In the morning, dishes clinked in the kitchen. Robert sat up on the couch, rubbed his face with both hands, and followed the sound. Alexandra stood at the stove, stirring something in a small saucepan. "We're having cocoa," she said without turning around. "Mom's signature recipe. I usually cling pretty tightly to coffee in the mornings. Today's menu is cocoa. No substitutions," Alexandra repeated in a tone that left no room for objection. "Sit down." Robert sat at the little kitchen table and watched as his daughter, and the words still did not fit inside his head. Warmed milk, poured in cocoa powder, stirred, and at the very end picked up a grinder and added a pinch of black pepper to the pot. Robert froze with the mug halfway to his mouth. "Wait, what just happened? What did you put in there?" "Pepper. Regular pepper. What's wrong?" "Black pepper. Ground black pepper in a sweet drink. Yes, standard procedure. Without it, the flavor is flat." She searched for a comparison, failed, and simply shrugged. "It's a family thing. Grandma made it that way. Mom did too. You don't like it?" Robert took a sip, rolled the familiar flavor over his tongue, warm, with a light tingling at the finish, and slowly set the mug down. "Can you wait 27 years? I thought your mother had some exotic culinary disorder." Friends used to cross themselves quietly when they saw the ritual, and our family doctor once tried, in all seriousness, to treat her for hidden acid reflux, but it turns out there's a whole dynasty. Medicine is powerless here, purely a genetic malfunction on the female line. Alexandra snorted, then laughed, short and surprised, as if she had not expected it from herself. Robert smiled, too, and something shifted between them like a rusty mechanism turning half a rotation. "All right," he said, finishing the cocoa. "I'll go to my little rendezvous with this biological innovator. Predictable. Just keep your eyes open. He words things beautifully. I'll give him that. But his messages make me feel like he isn't trying to sell me a birth father so much as a very aggressive business proposal." Robert arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early and took a corner table with a clear view of the door. Exactly at 2, Kyle Nicholson walked in. He was tall, lean, gray-haired, and dressed in clothes that managed to look both expensive and deliberately worn. He had the tan of a man who spent his life outdoors. He sat down without being invited, leaned back in his chair, and smiled. "Well, look at that. You seem livelier than I imagined. Regina painted you in very different colors. My late wife had quite an imagination, as I'm discovering," Robert replied. "Let's get to the point. What do you want?" Kyle stopped smiling and got down to business. Over the last 2 years, he claimed, Regina had supposedly opened bank deposits in his name. Supposedly, she had rewritten her will and included him among the heirs. She had promised to transfer Alexandra's condo to him for the stability of the family. He pulled one printout after another from his folder, spreadsheets, screenshots, statements. They looked serious, but not one of them had a seal or signature. The total came to roughly $180,000. "Regina spent years optimizing your household finances very intelligently," Kyle said, leaning forward. "You underestimated her, Robert. She thought strategically. And now you've come to collect your commission for being forced not to participate in raising a child. An entire life with my daughter was stolen from me, by the way. So yes, I consider this compensation a perfectly fair subject for discussion." Robert said nothing. Kyle, mistaking silence for confusion, added in a softer, more confidential tone, "She used to say you were too proper, flint-hard in your family principles. She was afraid to admit she had a daughter growing up. She thought you would tear her apart for that youthful sin and for having a child out of wedlock. She was terrified of your judgment, Robert. Yours. That landed. Robert knew he had held strict views all his life, but between strictness and cruelty, there was a deep canyon, and he would never have punished a child for the circumstances of her birth. I'll give you a week to think, Kyle said, rising. Either we settle this amicably as a family, or I bring in lawyers. And at the same time, I'll be taking a very active interest in Alexandra. A father's rights, as you understand, are sacred. He dramatically placed a bill on the table, turned toward the exit, and got the hem of his jacket caught on the corner of the chair. He tugged. The chair rolled after him. A spoon clinked at the next table. A waitress turned around. Kyle yanked harder, nearly knocked over someone's cup, finally freed himself, and strode to the door, having lost half his theatrical effect. Robert watched him go, and for the first time in 2 days felt not pain and not rage, but something close to grim satisfaction. He sat in the cafe another hour with cold coffee in front of him. Kyle's words kept turning over in his head. Too proper, afraid of your judgment. And then came the ugliest thought of all. What if he was right? What if Regina had kept silent for 27 years because her husband had created a world in which the truth had no place? But then another part of Robert began to work. The part that had fed his family for more than 3 decades. The engineering mind. If Regina had planned her departure so systematically, why were the entries full of honest doubt and regret instead of cold calculation? Why was there not one line anywhere saying Kyle had a right to money from their family accounts? Robert mentally returned to the printouts. Nicholson had spread across the table with the confidence of a magician. Spreadsheets, screenshots, statements, not a single bank stamp, not one teller's signature. Pieces of paper anyone, with a printer and a free afternoon, could manufacture. Over a long engineering career, Robert had learned to tell a working drawing from a sketch on a napkin. By the signatures, the scale grid, the seal of the design firm in the lower right corner. What had been placed in front of him at the cafe was a napkin. He paid the check, stepped outside, and caught a rideshare back to Alexandra's condo. On the way, he called her. I'm coming back. We need to go through your mother's archives again. We'll look at that documentation with fresh eyes, starting at page 1. For nearly 3 hours, the rug in the living room looked like a branch office of an archive. Pages from the old binder spread across the thick pile in strict chronological order, from the earliest yellowing entries to the newest ones. Almost 100 pages of someone else's secret life. Alexandra carefully sorted the papers. Robert read them aloud, and with every new batch of pages, the overall picture changed like an image slowly appearing in a tray of developing fluid. The early messages to Kyle breathed romance, nostalgia, and a naive, almost girlish hope. Later ones carried a dull wariness. About 6 months before the fatal crash, the tone changed once and for all. Kyle had suddenly developed a lively interest in other people's finances. He wanted to know everything. The status of the condo, the size of the family savings, and exactly what kind of inheritance Regina would be able to leave behind. Take a look at this masterpiece of the written word, Alexandra said, handing Robert a page dated 6 weeks before the accident. Read it. Every paragraph is beautiful. Robert scanned the lines. Regina wrote that she had made a catastrophic mistake. She had been careless enough to mention Robert's pension savings and the market value of their house to Kyle. The romantic hero's reaction had been immediate. He demanded that she ask lawyers how, in a divorce, she could bite off a bigger piece of those assets. When Regina snapped that Robert's retirement money was Robert's business, Kyle simply hung up on her. And here's the next act of the drama. Exactly 2 weeks later, Alexandra said, handing him another sheet. "The Kyle I somehow fell in love with 33 years ago," Robert read, feeling a cold anger begin to boil inside him. "And the man who has been blowing up my phone for the past 2 years are two completely different people. I was too lonely and too crushed by guilt toward him to notice the obvious in time." Robert lowered the page onto his knee and tiredly rubbed the bridge of his nose. Looks like the veil finally came off. She saw through him. Better late than never, Alexandra sighed softly. But yes, she finally saw the true face of her great benefactor. At the very bottom of the binder, carefully packed in a separate plastic sleeve with a bright red tab, lay the final entry. Regina had written it just 1 week before the crash, and it was addressed directly to Robert. He read slowly, stumbling over certain phrases and reading them twice, as if testing the strength of the structure. Regina wrote that she had made her final decision and was not leaving. What she had taken for a great love for Kyle all those years had turned out, upon inspection, to be old guilt and longing for a youth that could never come back. She admitted that Robert had loved her from the first day to the last, steadily, calmly, asking nothing in return except basic honesty. And that, she had written in her neat hand, was the one thing I never managed to give you. The letter made it clear she had already consulted an attorney to make sure all property would go exclusively to her husband, and to prevent any claims from outsiders. Alexandra would have the condo. Everything else would be Robert's. She genuinely wanted to introduce him to their daughter at last and try to repair their marriage, but without lies. At the bottom was her signature, "Your wife, Regina." "You know, if Mom really made it to a lawyer," Alexandra said, breaking the silence first, "then all those threatening documents he waved at you in the cafe. The deposits, the secret wills, are garbage, cheap tricks from a home printer." Robert silently took out his phone and called Oliver Hayes. The attorney answered after the third ring. From the sounds in the background, he was getting ready to leave the office. "Oliver, good evening. I have a strictly technical question. A certain Kyle Nicholson is claiming that Regina opened a stack of deposits in his name before she died and completely rewrote the will in his favor. How well does that information align with harsh reality?" A short, heavy pause hung on the line. "Robert, let's not wander into fantasy. I personally reviewed all financial records when we opened the estate file. There is one will, and you are the lawful heir named in it. There are no side deposits for outside parties. More than that, Regina came to my office specifically to make sure that, and I quote exactly, "everything stays with my husband without extra headaches or legal complications." She said at the time that she was trying to fix the stupid things she had almost done. "Oliver, can we put together an official, extremely cold letter for this gentleman? Something with phrases like no legal grounds, fraud, and extortion? We'll make it beautiful. You'll have it by email tomorrow morning. Print it and hand it to the sufferer." Robert ended the call and sank heavily onto the couch. After that marathon of revelations, standing was difficult. So she didn't lie, not at the very end. In her last month, she held her ground. Alexandra stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, a towel slung over one shoulder. What did our legal shield say? Your biological parent was bluffing, brazenly, right down to the last comma. All his papers are pure fake, meant to scare unprepared engineers. Excellent. In that case, I'm going to make noodles. You're starving, even if you're about to switch on your pride and claim otherwise. For dinner, A simple bowl of homemade noodles with vegetables steamed on the table, filling the apartment with the kind of warmth Robert had not felt since the funeral. At last, he voiced the question that had been hanging in the air all evening. Alexandra, since we've established that his claims are meaningless and I owe him nothing, what are you planning to do about him? Biologically speaking, he is your father. That's your right. I won't interfere." She set down her chopsticks, pushed her bowl aside, and looked at him with that honest, direct gaze that already felt like hers alone. "I read Mom's journals carefully. I saw exactly how skillfully he milked her. Now I'm watching him try the same trick with you. You know, a man who shows up to grieving relatives with a calculator in his hand might be a lot of things, but he is not a father." She paused. Fatherhood is something else entirely. It's when you're there, when you cover someone's back. When you think more about another person's well-being than your own wallet. In these insane 2 days, you've shown me more sincere care than that man has shown since the day I was born. Her voice grew noticeably quieter, but it did not lose its firmness. "So I've already found my father. I don't need another one." Robert quickly turned toward the darkening window. After all, stern 60-year-old design engineers did not make a habit of tearing up over dinner. At least, not in front of daughters they had known for only 3 days. 3 months later, Robert was settling into a new apartment located just a couple of blocks from Alexandra's building. They had sold the large old house in the suburbs without regret, and the downtown condo had been transferred to Alexandra exactly as Regina had intended. Life gradually entered a new, measured rhythm. One Robert had not designed, but which, for some reason, worked more reliably than any of his most precise blueprints. On Saturday morning, Alexandra knocked on his door as usual. In her hands were a box of still-warm homemade pastries and a thick envelope. "Happy Father's Day," she said, with a smile, handing him the fragrant load. "Officially, we didn't get tangled up in bureaucracy, but honestly, I don't care about courthouse paperwork." "Alex, in the interest of engineering precision, I must point out that Father's Day is in June," Robert said, laughing as he led her into the entryway. "And outside, to put it mildly, it is absolutely not June. So what? I've known you for 3 whole months, which gives me every right to create my own personal calendar." From the envelope, she carefully took out a small photograph in a modest wooden frame. In the picture, a very young Regina sat in a hospital room, holding a tiny bundle with a newborn baby inside. Both mother and child faced the camera. Regina looked frightened, disheveled, and incredibly happy. A 20-year-old girl gently holding the biggest and most terrifying secret of her life. "I found it in the farthest corner of Mom's archives," Alexandra said. "She kept this picture her whole life. I think a part of her always secretly hoped the day would come when you'd see it." Robert studied the faces in the photograph for a long time. Then he carefully placed the frame on the bookshelf beside his very first working drawing, a yellowed ventilation plan for a rural elementary school from 1990. "All right, the touching portion of the program is complete," Alexandra said. "Now we move on to the bad news." With a wry smile, she handed him her phone. A fresh message from Kyle glowed on the screen. "Your Robert is just a selfish man who stole money and an inheritance that didn't belong to him. Call me when you finally get tired of playing happy family with a man who is completely unrelated to you." "And what was the audience reaction?" Robert asked, handing the phone back. "Oh, read below." I answered in his favorite concise style. Robert looked at the lower line. Robert didn't steal anything. He received what Mom legally left him, and now he shares it with me simply because he is a real father. "You didn't even know I existed." And for the last 3 months, you've used me as a battering ram to knock money loose. I'm done. Forget this number. How long did it take you to write this Declaration of Independence? Robert asked with respect. About 12 seconds. Though, in fairness, I mentally rehearsed it for 3 weeks. Listen, are you sure you're not my blood daughter? He asked, squinting at her with irony. Because that reinforced concrete firmness in wording definitely did not come from your mother. Mom once said you could say no in a tone that made a person apologize for having dared to open his mouth. They laughed together, briefly but sincerely, and Robert caught himself thinking that in all his 60 years he had probably never laughed with such an absolute sense that everything happening was right. A week later, Alexandra came over again, this time carrying a neat, overstuffed folder. At the sight of that office supply, organized with a painfully familiar and slightly frightening system, Robert felt a sudden tightness in his chest. I present for approval our general financial plan. Alexandra spread the papers across the dining table with a businesslike expression. Here it is. House. The house sold for $520,000. Add Mom's savings and the rest of the estate. My proposal looks like this. Exactly $650,000 goes into long-term insured deposits and retirement investments. That's your personal safety cushion for old age. $40,000 goes into an education fund for my future children. Children? Robert asked, lifting an eyebrow. Are you in some kind of hurry? They'll show up someday. And I very much want them to be able to call you Grandpa with a clean conscience. The remaining $110,000 I'll keep for myself. I'll put it toward a down payment when I'm ready. Alex, you are voluntarily giving up 3/4 of what, by every law of logic, should belong to you. Dad, let's close the subject. I don't need millions sitting in an account. I need a normal, peaceful father who isn't being jerked around by thoughts of money and who isn't torturing himself with stupid guilt over this inheritance. Just be my dad. That's more than enough. Robert silently looked at the papers laid out before him. The same flawless system of colored tabs. The same neat calligraphic handwriting in the tables. His daughter had inherited her mother's best qualities: phenomenal orderliness, manic attention to detail, and a deep need to care for the people she loved. Only Alexandra had directed that entire arsenal not toward secrecy and lies, but toward absolute honesty. But I do have one hard counter-condition, Alexandra added, deftly gathering the sheets back into a stack. We need joint travel therapy. Mom used to talk about how much you dreamed of Italy, Florence, Old Tuscany, the Amalfi Coast. You two planned it for years, sketched routes, and kept putting it off. We'll go, Robert said without a second's hesitation. We'll go. A month later, they were sitting in what had become their usual corner cafe. In a short time, the place had turned into a kind of sacred family ritual. With a ceremonious expression, Alexandra took a thick envelope from her purse and slid it toward him. Inside was an official state document, a certificate of name change. Alexandra Regina Miller, his last name, her mother's kept in the middle. State law lets an adult change her legal name without going through an adoption process, she explained calmly, while Robert held the document with both hands as carefully as if it were crystal. I filed the papers a month ago, and I picked up the final copy today. Do you want to know how I feel right now? Robert asked, lifting his eyes to her. I do. Like after a very long, exhausting business trip, I finally came home. To a house I, as an engineer, never designed, but which turned out to be stronger than all my reinforced concrete structures. Outside the cafe's panoramic window, an ordinary gray Denver rain whispered against the glass lazily smearing the neon reflections of streetlights across the wet pavement. Alexandra slowly stirred her favorite cocoa, naturally with hot pepper, and sat in that special, comfortable silence that needed no words at all. "You know," she said softly at last, "I think she would have been truly happy for us." "I forgave her," Robert replied, watching raindrops slide down the glass, all at once. For the years of lying, for the foolish secrets, for her plans to run away. In the end, if not for that whole complicated script of hers, I never would have found you. Her deception was deeply wrong, but somehow it led us to something absolutely right. She loved you, Dad, in her own way, crookedly, imperfectly, with all her fears, but she loved you. "I know," Robert said, smiling almost imperceptibly, "and I think for the first time in my life, I truly believe it." He lifted his mug of plain, strong black coffee with no pepper whatsoever, because some tastes in this family were still not hereditary. They stayed in the cafe until closing, quietly and happily arguing over the details of the trip through Tuscany, completely unaware that the long rain outside had gradually given way to one of those unusually still, warm May evenings. "And now tell me, what would you have done in Robert's place? Could you forgive a betrayal if it somehow led you to the family you were always meant to find?" Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me if you've ever lived through anything similar, and if this story touched you, please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one.